It was with this profound passion and buildup of meaning that I had felt throughout my entire life that I expressed in a single statement the deep experiential reality that I felt the presence of God had been in my life, despite anything the professor was saying about the Bible. Even if the entire Bible were a myth, it doesn't change the fact that I have communicated with the mind behind this existence, and I call that entity God. If I have come to know Him through an illusion, then it was for the greater good, because He used that illusion to bring me to Him, regardless of the illusion's intended purpose, if a hidden purpose was intended by human creators. The professor's only response to this deeply meaningful personal statement of faith was, "That is a very profound and beautifully worded statement." No one had ever responded to my statements of faith this way. All my life I had experienced one of two extremes. Either people completely agreed with my statement and shared their own love and experience of God with me, or people completely disregarded my statement, called it rubbish, and called me delusional. In a single stroke, the professor had simultaneously given my faith sincere respect and negated its intended power. That is a very profound and beautifully worded statement, but maybe that is all it was. I suddenly faced the possibility that the beauty I saw in the Christian religion and my perception of God was just beauty. Like carefully crafted art, or carefully crafted words, maybe beauty was all it was. Like a poem, or a story, that was deeply touching, but not true. The professor was able to show respect for the power of my beliefs without actually believing them himself. This response was both new and deeply troubling to me. But I soldiered on. I knew God was real, and that He would save me from even the most troubling realizations. I know that even if I end up fallen and burning in the fire you speak of, God will lift me up. The professor responded, still trying to discourage me from my conversation with him. But Chris, that is exactly the kind of faith that may well disintegrate as you search on. Your entire universe of perceptions and values could be upended. But, I retorted, going on anyways is exactly what faith is all about. Also, unlike the professor, I knew that going on with the conversation was all I had anymore. If I turned back, I would only be returning to my increasingly troubled and hollow church life and waning connection with God. This conversation had become my only lifeline to connecting with that passion anymore. It was the only way for me to see God's face again. I would not stop. I had no choice. This conversation was the only way for me to see God's will anymore. And so the professor finally gave in, fully and completely, to my request for him to tell me what he really thought about God. I stood strongly, certain that God would rescue me somehow, certain that God would show me something the professor hadn't already seen. For 4 intense days, I wrestled with his beliefs. I tried to find holes in his arguments and his experience. I tried to tell him things about God he'd never heard before, but I was failing. Nothing I said seemed convincing to him. For every one hole I tried to reveal in his logic, he revealed 5 new holes in mine. What was most disconcerting to me was that my original statements of faith had seemed to have no effect on his beliefs. The Holy Spirit did not seem to be reaching the professor through me, despite his open-mindedness and honesty. This was further troubling evidence to me that maybe my Holy Spirit experience had been hollow and imagined. While this gave me pause for a moment, I ignored the observation and battled on, certain that my faith would save me. I told him that I was trying to wrestle through 65 years of experience to find holes, and that it was extremely difficult. He told me that what I was trying to do was counterproductive. He said that, given the fact that he was clearly more educated and experienced with these issues, I needed to sit back, relax, and take notes. I had to fully understand him before I could really think I had any grounds for dissecting his beliefs. I agreed with him. So I sat back, relaxed, and listened fully and intently to what the professor had to say before trying to rebut him. So he began. The concept of God is intricate and profound. If it were real, it would have drastic implications for the world we live in. But in all of academia, through all disciplines, we have found no reason to believe that it is anything more than a concept. Given what we know, God is just a concept. The professor's words echoed the sentiment of the philosopher Jean Baudrillard, whose work I had briefly encountered a few months before. Baudrillard defines the term simulacrum as something that is only an image of something either real or imagined, but that is interacted with as if it really is what it represents. This interaction can be referred to as a simulation of what a real interaction with the real thing would be like. So for example, if someone wears a pendant and believes it is lucky, the physical pendant has become a simulacrum of a magical pendant. To the wearer, it represents the idea of a magical pendant and is treated directly as if it were magical. When a person believes that the pendant brings them luck, they are simulating the experience that the pendant actually is magical. The physical pendant itself can be completely mundane and have no magical properties whatsoever. But to the wearer, who is simulating a magical experience in their mind, otherwise mundane but fortunate events are perceived as expressions of the pendant's power. One can think similarly about idols that are prayed to as if they are direct representations of gods, or pictures, possessions, or internal images of deceased loved ones that are spoken to as if they contain that person's consciousness. According to Baudrillard and the professor, God himself, as experienced by the religious, was probably just another simulacrum, an image, representing the concept of a supreme supernatural being. Religious followers simulated an experience of this supreme being in their own mind by the way that they interpreted otherwise natural events, but this experience most likely involved no actual supreme being interacting with them at all. So when I experienced profound emotions due to what I perceived as the Holy Spirit, I was, according to Baudrillard, just simulating, subconsciously, in my own mind, what I would feel like if the Holy Spirit actually existed and was reaching out to me. I experienced real emotions, but they were in response to a simulated experience. It felt real because my mind made it feel real. Our brains, apparently, are profoundly adept at creating simulations for our consciousness to experience. As far as I can tell, based on the literature, the professor continued, the primary psychological function of the concept of a personal God is to give the believer a surrogate parent. Some minds are able to become independent of parental figures. Others cannot, or fall into self-destructive behavior without them. Minds in this category rely on religion. The God concept is useful for motivating and pacifying others, but it is not a reality that someone like you or I should accept for ourselves. While I wouldn't just accept these hypotheses uncritically without checking into them myself, I was seriously taken aback by this line of reasoning. I'd never thought much about the possibility that psychology could explain my experience of God. Now that the professor had pointed out the relevance of psychology, this line of reasoning was so obvious to me that it was devastating. Was the voice of God I'd heard my whole life simply my own voice? Was my own mind behind all these profound statements? Was my own mind the subconscious force that had guided me through this conversation? Was every image and voice I'd seen or heard the result of my own imagination and reasoning rather than just some of them? Was my relationship with God suddenly failing because the simulation was breaking down? Were all the God concepts just illusions? These possibilities were both frightening and devastating, but I would not give up this easily. I still had so many other reasons to believe in God. Didn't I?